10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hey everybody, I am Amanda with DevExpress and welcome to our live stream today on Twitch. I am here with Areg. Areg, how are you doing?
I am doing great. And I think we're going to be covering quite a lot today, actually.
Oh, okay. So we need to jump right in?
Yeah, so yeah, we can head right in. So I did mention at the header that kind of, we're doing HTTP client today. So the idea is, especially nowadays where monoliths are being broken up into smaller web services, those web services have to communicate with each other using HTTP or some other client protocol, but they basically need to connect and communicate over the network. That's the point. And so, kind of, there are a lot more pitfalls involved when you increase the complexity of communication like that. So, not only could the client have a problem reading the communication from the source, but also kind of how do you broadcast that message. So, are you going to be using something like Signal R, socket connection, HTTP client? So basically, these are all questions that need answering. The questions that previously didn't exist. So I think to start us off, I'm going to really reprise where kind of we came from, because we were dealing with Maui quite a bit,
Right.
and then we started dabbling in Blazor, uploading files in Blazor, and we were displaying, or we didn't get to displaying them in Maui, but we're going to be doing that now. So this is actually a really useful repository, or not a repository, an actual account on GitHub with many repositories. This is called DevExpress examples. So the account is just DevExpress-examples on GitHub. And actually, there is a great example that kind of is the genesis of the code that we're going to be talking about today, because this was the original project that I saw, and I thought, hey, I could really improve this. So if you go into this folder in this repository, you'll see something called draw a custom signature. The idea is that we're using a community toolkit that Maui put out called the Maui Community Toolkit, and it has something called a drawing view, and we're using the drawing view here to actually input a signature. Because it's kind of like the obvious thing that you could be doing on a phone screen when you can write like this is doodling or writing a signature.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea is that we're letting people input a signature, and we're using our official API to fill in this signature on the PDF, and then we're using the official API to generate a bitmap image that is being displayed inside of, in this case, it's in our image control, our DX image, but I inverted that and I went further with it. But this is with our DX image control. I'm only reprising this because kind of, I guess, some of you maybe have been, I guess very few of you probably have been following from the very beginning. But if you have, it's kind of like, yeah, what's new? This is not really new. This is kind of just explaining where the code came from and kind of what we started from in terms of our idea about opening PDFs, viewing them inside of Maui. And the thing is that we really need to think about, or kind of, if you were to start experimenting with this and to start running around with Maui for the very first time, you'll notice a few things. You'll notice immediately that Maui is a very fast evolving framework. And that's kind of like an optimistic, nice way of saying that, in that Maui moves with such great velocity. There's so much development effort being put on it that things kind of go out of date very quickly. So it's kind of, you have to be on the preview edition of Visual Studio, and there are constant renamings and constant changes between versions. It's a double-edged sword, because it does mean it's getting a lot of love as a project, but it does also mean
changing.
that kind of you have to, yeah, it's constantly changing. That's exactly right. So the idea is that I really wanted to showcase kind of the pitfalls you're probably going to encounter if you actually try to run this code on your own. Because to be honest, I feel like I'm kind of doing a lot of sleight of hand in these broadcasts, because I'm kind of like solving problems for myself, and they're taking some time of me banging my head against the wall, and I'm solving them, and then I'm just presenting them like there was no real
Issue.
wait time involved, or no real, yeah, there was no real issue. I mean, it's not really advertising like a solution that doesn't work. All of this stuff works. The only problem is that official documentation may be at various states in time, and obviously repositories are just snapshots of what people put together at whatever time, and then they forgot about it and they get back to it. So usually there are certain things that you have to kind of overcome when you clone a repository like this one. So let's go ahead and just take this repository, and I just want to explain kind of what you typically will kind of encounter. So firstly, I'm going to go ahead and clone this repository, and I typically clone repositories in this style where basically I'm using an SSH key on my machine, and so I am using the Git protocol to actually call out to the website github.com that has a repository, and I've already run this, so PowerShell's helpfully telling me what I ran last time. But let's go ahead and just call this the Maui signer, the folder I'm going to be using. And I generally, when I call out the Git or GitHub to clone repositories, I usually also include this last argument, dept is 1. We don't have to, that just speeds things up. And I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see what I mean in case you can't see it on the screen. So the idea is that I'm going to be calling this, and I'll go ahead and include dept of 1 because I do want this to be pretty speedy. So I don't care about the full history of the repository. And like I said, this is the SSH key that I have on this particular machine. I think I input my password correctly, and I did. And I'm going to go into this thing called the Maui signer, and there's a folder called CS that we talked about, and the third project is actually the one that I care about. It's kind of really zoomed in, so you can't see the contents here, but if I show it again, this is what's in the folder. So I'm going to go ahead and run the solution in a new instance of Visual Studio, and we're kind of going to try to run this, and I think we're going to run into an issue, and I'll explain kind of what the issue is so you can run this at home and actually get a working build. So I've gone ahead and hopefully opened up in the other screen, but basically we're going to go ahead and set the target device here to what I actually have, which is I have an Android emulator here, and this time it did not remotely connect to my iOS simulator. So let's go ahead and try to build the whole thing and see what issues we encounter. I'm pretty sure we're going to encounter a few, and I'll explain what those issues may be. And the idea is, while we're waiting for this to run, I'll explain kind of where the code is at this point in time, because this is the starter code that I kind of built out my entire project off of, and I just wanted to kind of make people a little aware of what this is, because I think it's easy to get lost with how complicated it all is. So again, like that under the hood we're using a drawing view. So the toolkit, the Maui toolkit, has a drawing view, and we basically are using it to write a signature, and this project is building right now. We'll wait for it to build entirely. The thing is that we're using the drawing view. It's in a main page view. We're not using really, I guess we are using MVVM, but it's kind of like the style is not really, I'd say the modern sort of approach to MVVM and Maui, but this is just like putting together stuff and quickly having it work. And we have a behavior to handle the signing as well. The other important thing here is that we are also building this PDF preview, and it's actually, I think that the way that we have this written is that we, if I'm not mistaken, yeah, so here the meat and potatoes of what's happening is this piece of code where we're actually creating the bitmap, which is looks like the width is 1,200 pixels, or the largest dimension is 1,200 pixels. But basically this is creating memory stream that we're saving to, and we're going to PNG. Well, this is funny that it actually had no problems this time. Usually when I have a Maui project I'm loading from a remote repository, I do encounter certain problems, and I was hoping to go over those. So hopefully it's as smooth as it is for me on your machine too. Typically, there are a few things I need to do, and I'll explain what those few things are. So firstly, I usually have to go to developer PowerShell here in the project that I'm in, and I usually need to force the .NET tool to restore the actual project. So I've asked, let me go ahead and zoom in again, if I can. Looks like the font can't zoom in in Visual Studio, so I'll just do it here. So in this terminal, let me show you what I mean. So I usually have to go ahead and do a .NET restore and add the command or the option to force the restore. So that's something I usually have to do when projects are non-compliant. So just be aware, you might have to do a .NET restore with the force parameter, and use the force. We were talking about Star Wars just before this stream, funny enough.
We
but
sure
yeah,
were.
Use the force. That's the first tip. The second tip I have is that you might get a weird exception or a weird runtime error about Android manifest. The answer to that is that in your resources, or in platforms Android resources here, I believe. Actually, no, it's right under resources. It's Android manifest. You get this GUI representation of that XML file if you just click on it by default. But if you force Visual Studio to show it to you as an XML file, you get this thing. And usually I get all sorts of errors about I can't find the app icon, or the app icon path isn't good. So the build system complains about that. And it's really, sometimes you could go ahead and turn it off and turn it on again, and actually makes a difference. Various things in Maui are kind of dependent on that. So for example, if you change the XAML file and you change the view model for the XAML file, you might have to do that. I've done that a few times for various finicky projects. The other thing is, if you get an issue with your with this manifest file, just go ahead and you can get rid of the app icon. You don't actually need the app icon. As far as I know, I think the app icon is just literally the icon that you get inside of the mobile OS. So it's actually what shows up in your application list. So you don't really need that. You can get rid of it. It's not a big deal. And so you can just delete that line if you want. And what I mean by if you want is that if you get that particular runtime issue, just delete it, because that will resolve the problem. I think if I run this, it should work fine without this line, just to prove that that line is not important. And my luck, since it ran fine the first time, maybe the second time it's going to have an issue now that I took things out. But I don't think it will. So this is also the typical message that it's waiting for the debugger. And this is, I should also mention that in my old cast, you may notice that I had a different emulator. I actually have reformatted this entire machine, and basically because I reformatted, I went with the stock standard Android emulator that I was given, and so I haven't had problems with it. That's why I haven't bothered to install the hardware accelerated Android emulator. So I'm just using the stock standard Android emulator. And if you'd like, I think that you can actually check which devices you have. There's an Android device manager in one of these items here, if I believe I'm not mistaken. So at least if I go to debug, it should give me some debug options for different Android options. So like I said, only one emulator on this particular machine now after I've reformatted. But I want to kind of refamiliarize people with kind of where the starting point was for this code, because kind of I took this and ran with it, and I ran pretty far because I was constantly tweaking little things. So let me go ahead and close this out and head into kind of where I took this code. So one big thing is that I really was not totally satisfied with having everything running locally inside of the Maui app. I wanted to talk to a Blazor web service. I wanted to do interesting things there with it. And let me go ahead and showcase some of that. So let's go ahead and open. Okay, so here in this Blazor web service, kind of can dig right into it. So the idea is that I created this Blazor web service. I think it's already part of the code that you can kind of look at in terms of the latest branch. So, and just to clarify that, if I go to my GitHub account, this is kind of like the place that you can easily find where we're at in this particular live stream. So I helpfully created this thing called live stream projects, and I created a branch for the last major broadcast. So that was April 9th, and kind of this is a breakdown of where we left the code last time. I've actually gone a little bit further since then, and I don't think it's super helpful to see how I refactored it. I mean, I think that actually the old version was a lot more convoluted and a lot more confusing, so we don't necessarily get much of a benefit in terms of looking at what was there. One important thing to notice if you're just hitting the ground running is that I was running this web service in different places, sometimes in HTTPS, sometimes in HTTP, and if you do that, the default deployment configuration in development mode gives you different ports. So I think 5184 is what I started with because I'm just using HTTP and I'm still using that. But there's some commented examples of HTTPS, and I got those working fine. It's just that it was easier to communicate with Maui using HTTP because this is a local web service anyway. Anyway, so my point being is that if I were to head into this particular project, we can delve into where things exist for this web service. So again, just to explain what the web service does, there is a www root. www root has a folder I added called uploads, and the uploads has a bunch of PDF files that have been uploaded in the past or already uploaded. So if I run this, this will run the web service, and this is the web service we want talking to Maui. Now let me go ahead and just showcase what I mean. So there's a few changes as well that immediately come to mind. One is that the columns here have been updated because I did change the definition of what I call file tags. So if you go here, I used to have this property called server path on the file tag. I actually went ahead and changed it. I just replaced it with a GUID and I don't under the name, the short name of the file. So not the path, just the short name, because I don't really care about the server path. And the GUID is useful because I actually am integrating the rest of my dictionary storage service. Anyway, so there was one button, if you remember, called DL. DL is this one here. And if I go to my index razor, you'll see kind of what the boilerplate is behind that. So basically the idea is that when I click this DL file button, I'm calling out to this HTTP client that I registered under this pseudonym. So it's called my API. And if I pin this, well, it's already pinned. Let's pin it and go into the program CS. You'll see that this is where I added HTTP client. So basically, this is important to note because this is kind of, you do not want to repeat this step outside of ASP.NET Core or outside of web technologies in ASP.NET. We'll get to that, but basically this is using HTTP client factory. This is the right way to be injecting in the middleware in the pipeline for web apps because ASP.NET knows what it's doing. In this case, Blazor knows what it's doing, Web API knows what it's doing, but there is a risk of socket exhaustion if you just try to replicate this in other places like in Maui or in console applications that aren't based on, you know, Web API or something like that. So yeah, so this is how we create a HTTP client, and we did it the right way in this framework. That is, in Blazor, we did it the right way. And I'm calling this endpoint, which is gonna, as you'd guess, it's gonna list my files. And this used to be called the upload control. I changed it to the file control. That's why the path has changed a little bit. But this is going to basically list me a list of file tags. So if I go into the controller that I've updated, it's going to go ahead and hit this particular endpoint. And I already have this file URL storage filled. And basically when this controller is being instantiated for each request, that is when I'm going ahead and I'm actually pulling in the elements into my file URL storage service. So that's when it's actually being populated. So it's actually going ahead and refreshing at that point in time. So I think, if I'm not mistaken, yeah, it's going ahead and updating all the files in my upload path onto the file URL storage, and it's doing it. I exported this from the controller down to this idea inside of the service itself. So if I'm not mistaken, yeah, here in my service, I'm going ahead and I'm calling the path, and from the path I'm going ahead and loading in the files that I need. So if you're requesting a file, you're going to be basically giving me a GUID and not a path, and that GUID is going to be looking up in the dictionary. So the dictionary is going to, let's go here, the dictionary is going to actually here be the backing store that I'm using, and technically, I guess, to make this a little bit more cross-platform, I can actually make this in this format, because ASP.NET has been helpful enough, or .NET Core has been helpful enough to understand that, you know, that was a valid path, but I'm just, you know, gonna split it out so that there's more resilience if I were to deploy this on other machines or different configurations, so that I can quickly go ahead and just change out this path. But anyway, my point was that the important point is here initialize is being called. This initialize method is what's being called on the default constructor, and this is the point at which kind of I discard the idea of using a file system, and I'm using instead a dictionary, because instead I'm just going to wherever my root path is, and this is hard coded, so my root path is this thing, and I'm finding all the PDFs and I'm adding them to my dictionary, and notably I have to call the static version of new GUID so that I get actual new GUIDs, randomized GUIDs that is, and not just like the zero based GUID that's not really a GUID or not really a meaningful value, and I'm going ahead and adding these files by name and the other properties, and that lets me to look them up later. So there's a tighter coupling between the dictionary in my service and the calling code than before. So now I'm not really relying on there being a particular file system I'm storing this on. Now it's more kind of dependent on kind of getting a file tag and looking up the ID on the file tag. So this is what I'm doing here. So I'm just calling a list of file tags. I'm getting the latest one, and I'm downloading the latest one. I've already actually gone ahead and uploaded some files. There's one file on this. The other thing is that I noticed a little issue with this collection, this observable collection. I mentioned on the stream last time, but there was like a duplicate addition to this observable collection. So I was getting duplicates of file tags in my grid, and this observable collection is bound to the grid. So just that's kind of like a run through kind of some of those changes. But the idea is now if I click this DL file, it's going to run through all this code, and I'll kind of prove it by hitting a breakpoint. But if I were to run this, it's going to hit my breakpoint, and then I'm going to also hit my controller code as well, because why not also showcase the list action method. Yeah, there we go. So it's going to if I press continue, it's going to hit this breakpoint on line 48. This is a little issue I'm having recently, that the debugger in Visual Studio seems to think that I want to introduce some changes, or it thinks bizarrely that I'm doing something that I shouldn't be doing, but the code is basically not being changed at all. So let me just go ahead and restart the debugger instance, and between these two breakpoints, I guess it thinks I'm injecting some side effects. I'm not. For some reason it thinks I am. I think it's somehow related to hot reload being enabled. But I'm going to go ahead and let me add it also. Maybe go ahead and change my hot reload settings. I probably have to not be in debug mode to do this. My guess, since I don't really use hot reload so much, and the reason I don't use it so much is because I'm usually not just changing view code. I'm usually also changing view models too at the same time. So that's code behind, and that's C#. So if I can quickly toggle on and off, that would be great, because enable hot reload. Yeah, I think this is making the debugger behave strange, because honestly I know for a fact I am not at all doing edit in place while I'm debugging, so there should not be an issue. So again, let's hit that breakpoint, and I think if I go forward, let's see what exactly it's not happy with. There's a bunch of warnings, no errors, but let's see what hot reload is complaining about. Cannot apply. Yeah, it's hot reload that's behaving strangely. It's probably freaking out on some warning. Anyway, my point is that I can just go with one breakpoint. I don't have to do two. The second breakpoint is basically in the file controller, and that's the other breakpoint I wanted to showcase. So let's go ahead and run this service one more time. And basically the idea is that the file list action runs, and it gives me the latest file, and the latest was this particular novel that I uploaded, just as an example of like a big file. And I got like this like multi 887 page book that I uploaded onto this location, the uploads path, and this is the GUID that we have. And just to kind of like reiterate that these are all valid, I'm going to use this GUID later. That's why I kind of want to see it in front of my face. Let's upload a few more files, because one file is kind of boring to look at. So I'm going to go ahead, and I have some other files that I can kind of showcase. So it looks like I have this keyboard shortcuts file that looks like for some reason it's saying that can't find the latest. I think that I have a refresh problem, but let's, if I were to reload and I were to run this again and run my DL file, I should get two files. So I get this, and it still thinks that Shelby Van Pelt's book is the latest thing that I have. I actually want to go ahead and pull this in some other way. So I'm going to actually take this GUID and I'm going to curl the file that I want. So this is something else I mentioned. I generally don't use Postman or Fiddler. You know, Fiddler's obviously a competitor's product. We don't really have a competing product to Fiddler, so you could use Fiddler if you'd like. There's no issue. Use JetBrains products, because really we don't compete except on CodeRush. So I mean, honestly, as long as you use CodeRush, we're fine. Just use Rider if you'd like. It's fine. So I know this is kind of sacrilegious, but my point is that this GUID, I'm going to actually call it to get a file, because there is an API endpoint that I implemented called getFile, creatively enough. And I'm going to set a breakpoint on it so you can we can hit this breakpoint. But the idea is that this is a valid GUID, and I pinky promise swear that we actually did upload something at this particular GUID. So if I were to zoom in on this, and I can even get rid of this left-hand side of my console and just showcase this. But usually there's two ways to do this in PowerShell. One is called invoke REST method, and I don't know how to use this, or I don't use it because it's PowerShell based, and I'm not a PowerShell guy. So you could do invoke REST method, and I've already done this before, URI parameter, and then the URL parameter, and then the method and all that. I don't generally use that. I just use curl. So curl, the L parameter on curl is basically redirect. Capital O means I don't care about the file name, just give me what the original file name is. And I'm going to point this to my my port number that I'm actually using on this web service, and if I were to look at it in the browser, I can see it's broadcasting on port 5184. This is also where the controller is reachable. So 5184, and I'm going to point it at the get file action method, and it's basically just an HTTP get with the ID parameter being passed, and the ID is that GUID that I already copied from here. So we're going to go ahead and paste this in, and if I do that, the way curl works is that should already just pick up the file and throw it under the same name into this folder. So I hit the breakpoint like I said we would, and it's going to basically take this ID here. So it's going to take this ID that I passed in, same ID. So it's this ID. You see my debugger. I'm basically using the file URL storage service, and I'm picking it out. And I hope I don't have the same stupid debugger problem, because it is a stupid debugger problem. I don't know where it got introduced or how. I just noticed it yesterday. Yeah, I do have the same stupid debugger, but I can just edit code, I guess. Whatever. Doesn't like my errors, or doesn't like my warnings that I'm getting. Anyway, it's not a problem. I could just restart this, and I will basically set the same or send the same curl request, and I restarted the web service. I'm not going to be using the UI. I'm using curl. So let's send that again. This time without the breakpoint. Without the breakpoint, it means it's going to immediately send this GUID. The GUID's going to use a dictionary service. It's going to pick up the file and give me the file. I did mention last time as well that kind of this is important. The type of action result is a file stream result, and this is the type of file it is. Anyway, let's see our luck. A get file exception thrown. Oh, and the reason for this is that I get new GUIDs each time I run the application. So let's, oh my gosh, let's go ahead and rerun the application and find out what the actual GUID is of this file. So basically, I said that we use the static new GUID method, which means that I think I get a new, yeah, I get it. I don't care about downloading. But I get a new set of GUIDs each time I run that, which is most of the time super convenient and nice. But for the sake of multiple runs of the web service and getting the same file, it's kind of not so great. Clearly, I wanted to get this keyboard shortcuts file, and it has a new GUID that I need to use. So basically I need to pass in the right parameter. Otherwise, I've written my code so that I throw a not found exception sort of code. And now the file should be found because this is the valid GUID that exists now. And it downloaded really super quick, but if I were to look at what I have in this folder, I have something under that GUID name, and if I were to go ahead and run this file or to start it, it's going to ask me what file type is this. It has no extension, so I'll just open it in my trusty PDF viewer, and this is actually the file keyboard shortcuts. So this was the file that I was hoping to get. So basically my point is that absent everything else, our web service works fine. It's callable, it's reachable. So all the controller code works good. And what I can also do is I can call it from the front end piece in Blazor as well. So as I mentioned before, HttpClient factory is the right way to do things in ASP.NET. It's not the right way to do things in other frameworks, and we'll get to that. So basically, the middleware pipeline in ASP.NET handles HttpClient correctly, and what I mean by correctly is that there's a few properties of HttpClient. One is that it's disposable. The other one is that it has all these async methods, so it's thread safe. And the idea is that you don't actually want to be using too many sockets. You want to reuse sockets wherever possible, which means that the idea, you would want one HTTP client per server that you're connecting to. So if you have 100 server requests on, if you have 100 web requests on one server, you don't want 100 HTTP clients. You want one HTTP client, and you want it to open 100 connections potentially, but it will reuse the sockets for those 100 connections. So you'll be using one socket. If you don't do it that way, you'll get socket exception errors, and you won't see those on Blazor because Blazor is smart enough, and ASP.NET Core is smart enough to not let you do that. But you will get those issues in Maui, and you will get them in console applications. So that's why you should not use HTTP client factory in that sort of situation where you're creating lots of HTTP clients outside of this context. This is the right context to be using it in. We register the service in the app builder, in program CS, in ASP.NET Core. So I'm just calling this and getting the stream because I got this file stream result in the controller, and that's how I'm calling it. So this is all pretty straightforward stuff, and nothing really to really report back about this one. But what is interesting is that I want to take this one step further. I don't want to just kind of verify that the web service exists. I actually want to run the web service, and actually I believe, yes, here, this is a project that it's a console application to basically run and to ping this web service and to pick out the file, but to not run it in, or not to run the HTTP client in the same way or the same manner that I do in ASP.NET Core. So let me toggle word wrap. Okay, there we go. So you can see all my lines and all my code. But the idea is that there's a different approach that we take in this console application, or at least I do, and this is the right one, or the right way. And what I'm doing here is, and I really actually think that it would be helpful if I point out there was a very helpful person here. Very great article. I highly recommend it. And I'll link it in the description for today. It's called "You're Using HTTP Client Wrong, and It's Destabilizing Your Software." So the idea is, this is actually fairly old. This is 2016 era, but the approach is still, I think, pretty valid. The example code that the Maui team, James Montemagno, those people have, kind of follows this as well, except that they wrap their HTTP client in a service, and they register a service as a singleton in their Maui application. But I think at runtime it's basically equivalent to this approach. And you don't have to read all this. You can if you're really curious to know about how sockets get created and what the problem is. But the quick fix is basically what he's describing here, which is that per running lifetime of application, he has one HTTP client. That's why it's static here. And he's not disposing it, even though with most disposable objects, you put them in a using statement and then you dispose them when they're out of local scope. In this case, really, since we're reusing the same HTTP client over and over again, we don't want to dispose it until the application is done, and that's why it's a single global, and it's being called, and there's not really much to talk about here. It's actually really straightforward, and luckily enough, it's easy to implement. And so I kind of implemented the same thing here. The only difference is that I'm using other objects, and those things do need to be disposed. And so basically, the rule of thumb here is that everything else, that the streams, the serializers, all that stuff, they do need to be disposed. So put those in disposable usings, because they won't get reused anyway. There's no idea of what HTTP client has of shared resources on these streams. So you do want to put these in usings. But the only thing that does not get put in a using is this instance of HTTP client. And in my case, it's not in a static global because I'm just doing a simple, creation of HTTP client, and that's it. And I'm creating a second HTTP client. But basically, the idea is that if I run this application, the debugger is going to be not screwed up in VS Code. It's going to show me. It's going to hit my breakpoints. Let's see what I forgot to include here that it's not happy with. Control Shift M, see properties. Yeah, it looks like I'm missing a brace somewhere. So yeah, it looks like there was an errant brace added here, annoyingly enough, and that's because I'm using string interpolation here so that I could just put in any port number. And the reason, like I said, is that these port numbers change depending on if the service is HTTP or HTTPS, and if you run the service and run it in VS Code, or if you run it in Visual Studio, default startups change. If I run this again, F5, again, it was just the brace, an extra brace that was auto added because of features that are not super helpful but claim to be. Basically, we've already gotten the stream, and the stream is non-null and has a bunch of objects, and here it's calling the list controller, and that's a list of file tags. So if I were to go here to another breakpoint, if I continue to the next breakpoint, and if I go to F10, we list here at the bottom the names of the files that we actually have in our uploads directory. So we actually are getting a list of
Hey, Areg.
a list of yes.
I just wanted to let you know we just got raided by Code Rushed.
Oh, that's great. Well, hello, folks. So the idea is that for those joining in right now, we're calling a web service that we're running. It's a Blazor front end, or it's a Blazor server application, and what's being called at the end of the day is this controller. The controller basically is going to be invoking this action list, and the action is going to be calling a backing dictionary that lives in my service, and the dictionary is actually in this file URL storage service. And if I go here, it's this. So it's by GUIDs, I'm storing these different file tags, and file tags are basically descriptors for file locations and sign statuses, because it's a signing application. And if I were to go ahead and see what my results are, each file tag here, I get an ID for each GUID here. So these are the same IDs that you can see here. So these are basically the same thing. The idea for this is that I'm implementing kind of the pattern that is recommended by this website here. You're using HttpClient wrong, and the reason is that we don't want port exhaustion. So basically, sockets should be reused by HttpClient, so we should not dispose of it. But the pattern in Blazor is that when you want to use HttpClient, you register it at the very beginning of your website. So at the very start, where the middleware is running, your build pipeline or your runtime pipeline, you're adding in the middleware this HttpClient factory, and you're configuring it, which is not really the approach you should be taking elsewhere. Like I said, you don't want to create more than one instance whenever you can avoid it. And since I have a working or a valid GUID here, I can kind of take that GUID and call the other methods as well in the same way. So I was kind of listing the file tags, but what I can do instead is I can copy this particular GUID, and like I said, my application is built so that every time I run it, I get a different GUID because I'm running the static new GUID method. But what I can do instead is I can get a particular file. So if I were to, for example, run, let's say, file and this valid GUID, it's valid for this run of my Blazor server app, it's still running, I will get the file that corresponds to this GUID. So it's keyboard shortcuts Windows file, and maybe, yeah, so let's go ahead and run it, but I'm not going to get a list of file tags, so let's not serialize as a list of file tags. Let's deserialize it as a file tag, and it's not enumerable, so there's no meaning to enumerating here. Instead, what I can do, and let's call this file tag. Let's go ahead and run this, and I don't care about the other breakpoints. Let's run this, and we'll get kind of the descriptor for this particular file. And it's hitting the other breakpoint. This is starting my stream reader, and I don't care about this. And let's make sure that we're calling M2. So M2 is not being called here. Let's go ahead, and since it doesn't actually matter the other code here that I'm running for the testing the other endpoints of this web service, let's call just this endpoint the list endpoint. Sorry, the file. It would help if I gave it a valid route, but let's see what accidentally got added. Name HTTP client does not exist in the current context. Yes, that's because I was using it elsewhere, but VS Code caught that for me, and now it's going to be running, and it's going to be hitting this breakpoint or see what output I get. Let's continue. M2. Let's make sure that this breakpoint is reachable. Okay. And I'm going to do one last thing, which is that I'm going to make sure that we're actually getting console. Let's get in the output of this. Let's get the file tag. So let's get all the file tags properties. So I think the name, and let's verify that it's the right file tag. So I have an ID as well. And I have, like, let's say a last write time. It's not file, it's file tag in my case. Last write time, that's a property that I have, and let's not feed the compiler another issue. Let's go ahead and run that one more time. And so basically this is how you're going to be running web services, so that you can actually call the web. This is how you are going to be calling web services, and HTTP client is going to be configured in this sort of configuration where I'm trying to avoid as much additional creation as I can of HTTP client, and C# passing by reference, so we don't have to worry about the move semantics here or anything like that. It's handled for us by our language, and we're just going ahead and using a single HTTP client to actually call. The point is that this is going to be, or this already has been kind of something I've run with in Maui. So in Visual Studio, if I go to properties here, I can set multiple startup projects. I definitely want my web service to run, and I don't care about debugging it because I know it runs fine. And I want to run this signed PDF application now. And the point is that I kind of broke things down with different view models that didn't exist before. That's kind of why I wanted to step through this version and not refactor from where it was before. But the idea is that the kind of core idea, the main view model has been replaced with something else, and that main view model is now a navigation view model. And the idea is that I'm basically now using the same web service. I'm calling out to it, and I'm again not hard coding, but I'm globally setting the port, and I'm picking the list, and based on that list of files, I'm actually going ahead and showcasing the list of file names in my collection view. And my collection view, the view for this particular for this view model in particular is this. So It's this DX collection view. It's bound to the documents collection, which is being filled in my view model, and there's a few things that I did. So I set my data type here for the view model, and I'm using an instance of my navigation view model because this is the core view model at the very beginning. There's no parameter being passed to it. It's a list. So it's basically giving me a list of every single file tag for my web service. And the point is that if you notice, the way that I'm calling HttpClient is I'm creating a HttpClient instance for the one nav view model that I have, and then I'm disposing everything else as I need to. So I'm using everything else, putting them in using statements so that after this scope is done, basically it's gonna go ahead and run the dispose for me. So basically it's gonna run the dispose no sooner than that. That's basically, like I said, to avoid the problem, which is that you don't want to do socket exhaustion with your HTTP client. So you want to, as much as possible, have one server be attached to one HTTP client, and we only have one server in this particular case. So this actually has gone ahead and run, and it's not actually showing the file list I'm expecting. Let me go ahead and click this DL button, and this DL button means that I expect to see 2 files in my collection view. I'm not getting any in my collection view. So what I can go ahead and do is, my debugger is behaving a little strangely today. Let's see if I'm getting any strange exceptions being thrown, and let's also take a look to see if the process by which the web service is being called makes sense. So let's reload the whole solution. The solution is supposed to call out to the local web service, and while that's running, I should also mention there's one other modification you do need to make, and it's that when you are deploying web services locally, there are some complication you're going to get because of how the Android emulator is run or how the iOS simulator is run. So first things first, I should probably have already prefaced that this weird IP address is an Android requirement. So basically, the way the Android emulator works is that it's a VM that's behind its own router, and it has that router gives a pre-assigned address to the loopback address. So the loopback address becomes this 10.0.22 in the way the Android SDK wants things. So that's why this is there. The other thing is that you need to enable inside your manifest file or inside of your platform specific files the ability to talk to an HTTP service, because again I said that we're not bothering with certificates in HTTPS. We're doing HTTP. Since HTTP, we need to actually enable the ability to communicate. So this attribute application already was there under main application. So if you go to platforms, Android main application, which is kind of the Android specific main application, you can add this to the attribute. Use clear text traffic equal to true, and this parameter on the attribute will mean that you can actually call HTTP web services, and we're just using them on localhost, and that this localhost is this thing here. So that's just a FYI about how that works. So I don't think there is going to be an issue, but let's step through the code because I think that it's constantly saying that I'm making changes when I'm hitting the debugger. So so run and continue has some sort of issue on my particular computer. Let's go ahead and run this again. So let's rerun. So it's going to not give me that issue with edit code in place, but it's going to go ahead and call. So there's a few places that I should reiterate again. We were able to call from the, let's find out what it's complaining about. So we were able to call this web service correctly from the console application. So we know the web service does run. Let's find out what the inner exception is. So it looks like probably there is some sort of issue with my, let's see what my port is defined as. I'm curious. 5184, and it looks like the web service I'm running is 5184, and that still works. So I'm able to pull the two files from my web service at that location. I get the two file tags. So this is being set properly. It's not that, and this is, if I were to go into my terminal and I were to run kind of one of these commands with a valid GUID, I said the GUIDs change each run in the application. So if I were to set this with a new valid GUID, I should get a result, and the result should be, what is this for? This is for keyboard shortcuts again. So let me just name it keyboard shortcuts. So shortcuts.pdf. So I do get, just to verify that the web service does run correctly, I do get this file. I get the other file too if I want to, by the way. So if I take the other GUID, this endpoint for the other file, the other large book, it should work as well. So this is called, like, let's say novel. And again, it's just CURL. You could use Postman if you want. I don't use Postman because GUI applications are just harder to figure out for these sorts of tasks. It's just easier to figure out once. So this is all 887 pages that I downloaded from my web service. So that the web service is working fine. Localhost is working fine. Well, it looks like there is some sort of issue here with what's going on here with the result that I'm expecting to get back. So let's take a look at maybe, I think it would be useful to try to hit this breakpoint. I don't think I can get this far. So this will tell me how far I get before I have my actual issue, and I'll get rid of the try catch block because it's going to, if I can find out a little bit more about the exception, I think that will be helpful. So yeah, this does not hit, so it's this line that's causing the problems. API file list, and is there anything wrong with my route? Let's take a look. API file list, this looks correct, and get stream async. Okay. Get stream result async. Alright, and I'm going ahead and I'm creating my stream on that basis. I'll get rid of my try catch block because it will give me a little bit more information to have like the ugly error. Don't want to make this invisible to users. I care more about making this visible to me. I'm gonna get rid of the string interpolation too, so that I can see it all in one line. This is the right path. So this time I should get the raw error, and the raw error might give me more information why it works in console but not in Maui. We'll find out right now. And so we're gonna get this error that's gonna hopefully give us the full details. And we'll look at the exception details. The exception basically, okay. Let's go ahead and show. Let's go look at my call stack, exception details, and let's go ahead and see if I can find out more details about why it was not happy with that. So I'm calling the correct client, and the client is I think what is happening is that there is a slight difference between kind of how instantiated HTTP client in the two places. So let's just go ahead and quickly put this in. The base address needs to be this Maui application port. I believe that was what I called it. So let's go Maui app, and it should be my Maui program CS. My Maui program CS is going to have this defined there. Maui program. Well, not Maui app, Maui program. So the higher level Maui. So this should just be here, and that might have been the problem, that the base address was not specified. And once I have the base address, again, this is the analog in Android. You have to use this. Just give it the IP address without the port. And the other thing I wanted to mention, didn't really head into iOS, but I wanted to also mention there is going to be an issue with running this in the iOS simulator and calling a local web service from iOS. The reason for that is that the iOS simulator is actually on Windows running on a remote machine, and we're connecting to it through network connection, and that means the iOS simulator is running on a Mac that's not this machine, so it's not local to this machine. So the web service has to somehow be at some location that both apps have access to. That's just, or both computers have access to. So you have to either deploy to some other network share or something like that to make the web service available, so it's not going to be running on local host. And I think that was what the problem was, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was just that for some reason I was changing this route, and I think I basically clobbered the route when I was later calling this. So get stream, that's the pattern that it follows. Okay, so I think that is the issue. So now we should probably get a list of file tags. And the list of file tags can be shown in our collection view. It's waiting for the debugger. It's still saying that it's not happy with something. And let's go ahead and let's make sure that pattern is fulfilled. So base URI, okay. And just to be safe, I'm going to actually see what this looks like so that I'm not making some 10.0.22 and actually I can actually verify that from my last commit, I think that there was this idea in my Maui app that I did have inside of my main view model. I refactored quite a lot since then, but my HttpClient should be there. Okay, all right. And I'll put this try catch back in and go ahead and hit this breakpoint. So I'll kind of reiterate this in the console application if the Maui front end doesn't want to read our web service. Okay, so file list. Let's go ahead and take one last look at our route that we have that actually does work. So here we go. We're going to go ahead and put in our route. our route data that we know does work. And the other possibility is I want to make sure this is not a deserialization problem either. So what I want to see is I think this is what's causing my problems, that I'm actually pulling yes. Let's go ahead and see what my result is, and if it doesn't work, we'll go ahead and just bind directly inside of my web runner that I've already implemented. But it should go ahead and pull the file list, and just for verifying that that web service is not a problem, what I'll go ahead and do is I'll also run it in the back end. So let's go ahead and go to where this thing exists, which is under the latest version. So let's go ahead and .NET run the web service so that the web service is running. We're running this in console and not in multi-project. I think there's some potentially a debugger issue in Visual Studio that these are the warnings, you can just ignore them. They're not a big deal. The web service is running now, and I'm going to go ahead and go into my project start properties, and I'm going to go ahead and only run, well, I'll go ahead and single start this project. So make this the only project we run when we debug. So the Maui front end is going to talk directly to what is it not happy with here. Oh, that's because it's trying to let's get the Meteor debugger in VS Code to help us out a little bit. So I mentioned this before, but we have a debugger for Meteor, or a debugger called Meteor, that is basically going to allow us to debug and set device properties. And the device for this, what's going on with this Blazor server app. So I'm going to go ahead and run just the Blazor server app, and default HTTP, so I get the right port, and just so that I could do things independent of the main process in DevM, because that might be the problem that's blocking this and that's causing some sort of issue. And no, let's find out what the underlying problem is. So like I said, kind of the handy way of, and let's zoom in a bit. The handy way of kind of restoring this, or to run this again, is to restore. So let's go ahead and go into Blazor server here, and let's do a .NET restore. It looks like it's happy with that, and let's do a .NET run to see if there is some sort of issue. Oh, it looks like what it's complaining about is I'm using these files in some way. So usually there's a lock placed on these files by something like Visual Studio. That would be the #1 culprit of this. So I will save any changes I have and close Visual Studio, and we'll do a .NET run now, and that should have been the only active. Yeah, now it's running fine, and it's running at the port I'm kind of expecting my web service to be running on. So I get this thing, I'm on dark theme, but it's running. And now if I run dev, so it's Visual Studio, and it's the last solution I was in, which is this signed PDF. And now if I go ahead and, this is maybe not the right one. I got many different projects but with that name, but it was a multi-project solution. So let's go ahead and go into the Maui, so where the solution is stored here. The solution is stored here, or this signed PDF and so on. It's going to open Visual Studio, so I'll delete this instance. We'll go ahead and open Visual Studio now, and this will give us the multi-project solution. We're still running the web service on in the background, and if I go to my project start settings, it should only be one project. So hopefully this is going to be more indicative of kind of what to expect, and I don't want to like hit the same debugger issue, so I'll just not put that breakpoint there for that purpose, and it's going to build and deploy, and the running version of the app, the web service, is back here, and it will kind of tell us in the logs what it's received from other sources of communication, and it's right now hopefully it's only packaging the application and sending it to the Android emulator. I hope that it's not doing something else. Well, it looks like I might have to run the emulator first, and then we'll do this last run right now. So let's go ahead and let me go ahead and launch the emulator. Okay, so it's running my Android emulator now. And basically you get little warnings in Maui that this might take some time because you're running an entire mobile emulator for this device, so that we can actually package the application and send it there. It's kind of an involved process compared to running just the web runner in the console, but we do have indication that, hey, not only does the web runner run, but the web service runs perfectly fine as well. So now the Android emulator device is running. We can go ahead and run this and see if that helps at all. So just to reprise, we know the web service works, we know the web runner works in console, and I'm kind of figuring out that I guess that I have some strange debugger issue in Visual Studio I need to look at. But everything does seem to work as I expected to, or I've implemented it to.
Okay.
So the only thing I could think of is that there is an important IP address that the internal Android router recognizes as my loopback address, and it's still giving me exceptions. So it's going to be an empty collection, unfortunately, and it's running here, and it should load the collection view, but it's empty. But unfortunately, this is as far as we can get today. I don't think we're going to get much further. I'll have to diagnose this a little bit more. But the point is that actually we are able to get a list of items, and that list of items is basically a set of file tags. Using that set of file tags, I'm able to pull out the individual names and IDs of the things that are in the uploads directory, and the actual Blazor front end is this thing. So I could still go ahead, and it's still running, so I can go ahead and point this at, let's say, something like a file, a largest file, and I can see this file visible here in my set of uploaded files. So the entire web service and the Blazor front end works fine. The only issue is that the HttpClient inside of Maui is being finicky at this point. So we'll leave it off there. I don't want to take any more time. I just wanted to kind of make sure that today we made it clear what the goal is with HttpClient. So essentially, if there's one takeaway here, it's that we were following along with these recommendations for HttpClient. These recommendations do work everywhere. They actually work in Maui as well. For some reason, my environment in Android, I think the emulator is having some sort of issue. I gotta look into it a little bit further. But the point is that we can call web services using HttpClient in this manner, and the manner is basically create as few instances as you can of it. It's already thread safe. It already gets disposed when the application is destroyed, so no need to dispose it in the same way you would dispose a stream, for example. But yeah, that's actually all she wrote, Amanda.
And she wrote a lot.
Yeah, yeah, she did. It was a novel this time. But yeah, that happens from time to time, I suppose.
Well, yeah, of course it does. All right. Well, thank you, Areg. All right, everybody. We have another live stream this week on Wednesday. You can join Gregory and Don. Gregory's going to be talking about DevExpress Angular, some of our lesser known Angular controls. So join us for that tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, and we will be back next week on Tuesday and Wednesday. All right, everybody. Thanks, Areg. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye.